Okay, I am going to actually be Zoom lecturing today, which is exactly what I didn't want to do, but time is running out and it's taking me an incredibly long time to produce the YouTube videos. So we got to get something done. So I'm going to do online lecturing. I am recording this lecture. Several folks in class have had time issues, schedule changes and stuff. So they'll be able to watch this and you'll be able to watch it later for the exam. I'm going to kind of skip by a special request to our last unit, which is evolutionary psychology. This is kind of a preview of my 157 class. My 157 class, the evolutionary psych class, essentially grew out of this lecture getting bigger and bigger. It's got some really fun stuff in it, or at least I think it's fun. So I hope you enjoy. I've got the chat up, so if you have questions along the way, please don't hesitate to ask or to interrupt if you don't understand something. Any questions before we get going? All's quiet. One thing that I'm working on, just to let you know, because I'm getting some emails about it, I am still trying to figure out all the iClicker nonsense, and I probably will be sending you all an email just asking for your registration number so I have them from everybody and I can just get the bloody thing fixed so you know where your grades are going into the end of the semester. So let's get started on evolutionary psych. I figured out how to put a slideshow in a Zoom window so you can follow along. And not only will the presentation today that I'm recording in Zoom be saved, but I will then afterwards post the PowerPoint for you. So let's take a look at some evolutionary psych. Darwin, a long time ago, said, "In the distant future, I see open fields for far more important researches. Psychology will be based on a new foundation of the necessary acquirement of each mental power." Get the camera closer to the slide so I'm not moving my head around to read too much. Capacity by gradation. So even in the late 1850s, Darwin saw a point for evolution playing a role in psychology. If you've had a history of psychology course, you should be through functionalism at this point. Functionalism was the first major school of American psychology that was highly influenced by Darwinian thinking, especially William James and some of the other folks that started functionalism. Whoops, having this problem where the slides are moving too fast. Dostoevsky had a similar quote like this for biology. I've stolen it and made it into a psychology one. And he says nothing in biology makes sense in the light of evolution. I say nothing in psychology makes sense, except in the light of evolution. And people may disagree with me on that, but they're wrong. You know, I like my fake motivational slides. I have several of them to start our evolutionary piece. So this one is the tiliac. It's an intermediary creature between fish and amphibians, found in northern Canada by Neil Shubin, the biologist who wrote Your Inner Fish. one of my favorite books and video series. And this fake motivational poster says it all. We have the fossils. We win. Natural selection, another fake motivational poster, still works. Hopefully this is very fake. Otherwise, these guys are even more incredibly stupid than enough to set this up. I like the rubber sandals holding up the power strip with the cords running in and out of the water. At least they had fun doing it. I love this slide. It shows the woman made up to look as much like the fish as she can. And says, is it really so difficult to believe we came out of the sea millions and millions of years ago? The handfish, the irony of this species is that one day it will evolve and completely deny and refute evolution. This is a pretty good cartoon because I think humans tend to overthink things. The other species seem to have it down. As you know, I'm a fan of dogs. Dogs, I think, have us figured out pretty well. Caveman days here, cooked meat, wheels to chase, fires. Fellows, we're done evolving. If you've seen any of the videos that I've created and put up on YouTube, whoops, I missed a slide. I took that one out. I had another dog slide there that I took out to shorten this lecture a little bit. That was the We Are Couches slide, where I got my little ending video thing from. The only slide that gets near religion, God throws creation as the curve. We'll not deal with religion and evolution now. To kind of get you in the mood, the thinking in evolutionary terms, a lot of evolutionary stuff has to do with mating and reproduction, which is high on the list of things that other animals do besides us. Let's look at some cross-species things. I've been collecting some of these over the years. The hippo. How's this for mating rituals? He evaluates his potential mate by spraying her with his poo. Not something you can anthropomorphize very easily. Here is a camel. The male camel has this big thing hanging out of its mouth called a dula. And it drools excessively, and I guess this turns on female camels. Doesn't do much for anybody else but female camels, probably. The male Argonaut octopus, one of the most unique mating rituals. It has one arm that is full of sperm. When it wants to mate, the male Argonaut shoots his or detaches his sperm arm, and it swims over to the female and attaches to her and fertilizes her. Here's a different Argonaut octopus. The females continue to grow and reproduce after spawning. After the male shoots over his penis leg and it attaches to the female, he goes off and dies. Probably kind of fitting. The anglerfish. There are actually two anglerfish here. Let me see what I can get in terms of a cursor. Whoops, sorry. Can you see the cursor here? On the PowerPoint slide? Yes, no. Oh, yes. Thank you, Anthony. This is the male, this tiny appendage here. It's called a parasitic male in terms of mating. The male attaches himself to the female, injects an enzyme. They bond together, talk about pair bonding. And he injects his sperm into the female and then dies there. So you see some very big differences in size between males and females with these anglerfish. Probably the most unusual mating ritual that I've seen is something called penis fencing. I used to always make the comment that you can go home from class and tell, if your parents ask you, what did you learn in school today? You can say you learned about penis fencing. Now you're at home learning about penis fencing. So you can share this with other people if you want to share this wisdom. This is a flatworm mating ritual. They can be either male or female. Basically, what they do is stab each other with their penises, and whichever worm penetrates the skin first becomes the male. The one who has been attacked and gored and has sperm set in its body becomes the female. I do have a video. So I just moved it. Let's see. Okay, not cool. It worked when I tested it earlier. Are you hearing the audio on this? No. Okay. Let me see if I can change something here. I'm going to do it in the cheesy way. I've been talking to you with these headphones on to prevent feedback, but I'm just going to pull my headphone and let the sound play through the microphone. That'll save me playing around with the computer. It won't be as good as it should be, but better than nothing. Hang on just a sec. Okay.
Leslie Newman and the Shape of Life photographic team have set up a special tank to film a flatworm's unique mating behavior.
I'm rolling. Hearing it now?
Just swimming around. Hands up and look around.
Great.
There, right there.
Okay, hands to the water.
Okay. One second. Yeah, yeah, there it goes. I think they're going to do it now. I think one's approaching the other one, and it's rearing up. You can see it. You can see it. It's going. It's going. It's going to stab. Okay. Okay. Up. He's rearing up.
We may never know what the first animal courtship was like, but these flatworms can show us how even simple animals add their own twist. For them, sex is more like war than love.
Those white protrusions are the penises. They have two.
Fencing, and the worms are the swordsmen.
Right there.
From the midsection of each flatworm, double daggers protrude. Each dagger is actually a penis. The first one who can make a successful jab delivers its sperm. A bout of this violent sex can last up to an hour and leave gaping holes in the body of the loser. Sperm can be injected anywhere on the skin where it's been absorbed. The losing flatworm must then bear the burden of motherhood, committing valuable resources to having offspring. Soon after, the designated mother will release the young and prepare for yet another brutal round of penis fencing.
as someone who was, one of the sports I did when I was younger in undergraduate days was fencing. Maybe that's why I'm so, excuse me, enthralled and interested in that particular video. Okay. So, no birds or bees doing it, just worms and camels and stuff. One thing that evolutionary psychologists do, modern ones look at, is the notion of adaptive problems that are faced. And we could talk about tons and tons of animal issues, but I'm primarily focused on humans for the rest of the lecture. No more penis fencing. So let's look at some of the adaptive problems that we face as a species. First of all, successful competition with members of our own sex for members of the opposite sex. Theoretically, all men are competing with all women all men are competing with all other men for the best possible women, and all women are competing with all other women for the best possible guys. So that's one adaptive problem, competing for a mate. Another one is mating itself. And that has to do with the social and sexual behaviors required to fertilize or conceive. This is a really broad brush category. It has to do with finding a mate and hanging on with them long enough to have sex and to produce babies. Keeping a mate. How do you keep your mate for the long term? That's an important issue, and it's called mate retention. In the other class, which I'll refer to quite a bit, I talk about mate stealing, or what we also call mate poaching. I don't like the term mate poaching. I always think of poached mates on toast. That's just my weird way of thinking about the world. But 40% of relationships start when one or both people are in another relationship. So from that perspective, keeping a mate becomes an important thing. Parental investment. Once you go through all the effort to find someone who can tolerate you and have children with you, you have to invest in those kids, care and socialize them. And that's a very important life task. We also have extraparental kin investment. We invest not only in our children, but in relatives that are genetically like us. Let me give you a hypothetical example. And you can type in your response to my question to you in the chat box if you want. In fact, I'd like that because I'd like to see what you're thinking about this. So I'm going to give you a hypothetical. I'm going to give you $50. That's a very hypothetical. I know you're already spending it, but here's the next part of the problem. Now you got to give it away. You have a choice. You can give it to the little girl that lives next door, or your niece, your brother or sister's daughter. All things are equal. One isn't in more financial problems than the other. You don't hate your brother or sister. You're not arguing with them. Everything's kind of on an equal basis. Who are you going to give the money to? Your niece or the girl next door? Yeah, it's niecing up here. Everybody's writing niece. Did you even have to think about that one? We're kind of hardwired to invest in relatives. And the closer the relation of the relative to us, the more we're going to invest in them. Think about Christmas, which seems a long, long, long time ago now, since last Christmas. We go do a lot of Christmas shopping for relatives. Generally, we spend the most money, not necessarily on a relative, but on our partner, which is probably the smartest thing to do. Then if you have children, you probably spend the next greatest amount of money on your kids. If you're married, you might spend more money on your kids than you do on your spouse. That's just life. But then by the time you get down to fourth or fifth cousin, if you even know them, you might give them a plate of cookies or maybe just an email electronic Christmas card. So we invest in people that are genetically closer to us. Whoops. That was the last one. I'm missing a problem here, and I'm not going to go back. My slides are clicking too fast. Usually the first adaptive problem I have there is the hostile forces of nature. And we're really looking at the hostile forces of nature right now. You know, when I say hostile forces of nature, people usually think about, oh, hurricanes. I'm from the Midwest, so everyone in California is definitely afraid of tornadoes. Being in the Midwest, I've been around tornadoes, tornado warnings. It's never hurt anybody around me, fortunately. When I moved to California, all my relatives thought, I'm going to move to California, and California is going to have a big earthquake and fall off the edge of the country. You know, we have these stereotypes. So hostile forces of nature, they can be weather, they can be all kinds of things. If you want to put a big label on it, the COVID-19 thing is a big hostile force of nature. Look what it's done to our society. If we wouldn't have done anything about it, there'd be a lot more people dying. This flattening the curve thing, which I was a little cynical about to start with, I've kind of fully embraced at this point. And I've always told my students, it's not, you know, you have more of a chance of being succumbing to the little tiny bugs and viruses and bacteria than you do have to worry about hurricanes and earthquakes and tornadoes and like. You know, you put predators in there too. When we were on campus, we only lost 3 or 4 students a year to the mountain lion attacks in the free speech area. No one even wrote about that. I'm kidding. That's a joke. I worry that I'm recording this and it's going to get out. That one says students being picked off by mountain lions in the free speech area. No, just a bad joke. Okay, so adaptive problems. Let's look at some basic evolutionary issues. The first point, and this is a really important point for us personality folks, selection happens at the level of the individual. We make our choices in the evolution game. And we either do adaptive things or we do unfit things and we get selected out. But it's an individual choice. A species doesn't decide what to do. Individuals in a species decide. And it turns out, yeah, that's how rumors start. I like to start rumors. Brianna commented on my mountain lion thing. So we make our choices. Now, it turns out that the most adaptive things get done by most members of a species. So evolutionary folks oftentimes like to say that what is modal is good, or what most people do is good, because it's a very adaptive thing. One of my favorite relationship stats. 90% of us at one point in time get married, or we form some kind of long-term pair bond with somebody. That's as a species. You get 90% of a species to do anything. That's pretty good. You know, you're never going to get 100% of a species doing something. Now, some of us don't get it right, and we have to get married second, third time. I think personally, I only know of one person who's had 4 marriages. I know some people have had many more than that. You follow popular stuff, Larry King, the old talk show guy, I think he's in 6 or 7. But 90% of us get married at least once. So marriage for humans must be a very adaptive thing. And when I'm talking about marriage, I'm talking generally about pair bonding. I'm not necessarily talking about marriage, but we pair off with each other. And that's a very adaptive thing. Oops. We need three things for evolution to happen. And without these things, we're going to kind of skip through a bunch of little topics here. Without these things, evolution doesn't occur. So first of all, we need variation. There has to be some kind of variation because there has to be something to change to. The second thing we need for evolution, I'm going to come back after I get these 3 points through and give you an example. A couple of examples, actually. So we need variation. We need some distribution. And I just stole an old normal distribution from a set of slides just to give us a picture. We also need selection. Part of that distribution has to be favored by the environment or by other people in the environment. The third thing we need for evolution to happen is inheritance or genetic retention. We have to keep that characteristic. So let me go back a couple slides and start over again. Let me give you an example from the realm of sexual selection. Now, let's pick a variable that women look for in mates. Height. And you can chat in on this one or chime in verbally if you want to. But if it's the only variable, and I'm talking to the women in class, if it is the only variable, do you want to have as your partner a guy shorter than you? Either you're thinking about it or thinking it's an absurd question. Women generally don't want guys shorter than they are as long-term mates or even short-term mates, if that's the only variable. And we know we pick out mates for lots of variables, not just height. And we know guys vary in height. Some guys are height challenged, they're short. Some guys are very tall. So we know that there's some variation in male height, and it happens to be normally distributed. So women will select guys on the higher end of this distribution, taller guys. But if you look here, they won't necessarily pick guys all the way out to the extreme here. If I were to ask the women in class again, would you want to date a guy that's 12, 18 inches taller than you? Walk down the street hand and ankle. Line I stole from an old Martin Mull song from the 70s. Generally not too tall. In fact, there's kind of a sweet spot. The mate preference literature generally says women on average like guys that are about 3 inches taller than they are. I happen to think that works out kind of well because guys like women on average that are 3 inches shorter than they are. McKenna says that she's 5'9" and prefers a taller guy. Once women start getting really tall, it makes it harder to do that. Trying to read, not some of your comments here. Well, you can have guys that are a foot taller too, and it's just an average. You have to remember, average is an average, and it goes. And again, if it's the only variable. Courtney says being tall is a bad thing for a woman. it just makes it difficult if height is an important variable to you. My wife is 5'8". My first wife was, I think, 5'5", 5'6", something like that. It's interesting because when I started dating my wife now, and we just hit 19 years of marriage, her husband was also like 5'9". So Vicky didn't own a pair of high-heeled shoes. All her shoes were flats because she didn't want to put on high-heeled shoes and be taller than her husband. After we got together, we happened to hit about that sweet spot because she's 5'8" and I'm 6 foot even. So we have that about 3-4 inches. Yes, guys can be intimidated by tall women. That's one thing you got going for you. You can intimidate guys. So you probably always, if you've ever been in a situation where you've had to run into your partner's ex and do something with them, it can be really awkward. So I remember there was one time that I had to give something to my wife's ex-husband, and he was going to show up at the house, and my wife was not going to be there. We weren't even married yet. This was right before we got married. And we had moved in together because both of our leases expired, and we just moved into a new place together and got married a few months later. But he comes to the door. We both kind of do a guy grunt at each other. I give him the bag. He walks away. No big deal. Vicky was all worried that we were going to say something to each other and there was going to be a little dust off between the two of us. It was a nothing burger. So later on our lunch hour, she calls me. This was, I think, during the summer. And she goes, "How did the exchange go? How did it happen?" And I had one comment to her, and she had never mentioned her ex-husband's height. Didn't have to. He was not worth it. But anyway, she asked me, "Well, how did it go?" And I said, "He's really short, isn't he?" And she cracked up. Now, just to give you some context, Vicky's done with her divorce days, and she's got approximately 300 pairs of shoes. I don't even get to use our bedroom closet because it's filled with her clothes and piles of shoes. In fact, the hallway closet has been taken over and she's full of her shoes. And she enjoys wearing high-heeled shoes when she couldn't wear them while she was married to her ex. So, kind of funny. But height is something that you can pick. Height is also heritable genetically. So we can retain that in the next generation. Now, let me give you another example, and I usually draw this on the board, and I forgot to think about this. Let's pretend there's no variation. Let's pretend we've got a really, really, really tight curve, and there's no variation for something. Let's talk about it in terms of a potential preference thing, and I don't know how to draw on this thing without spending hours figuring out how to do it. I'm not going to waste your time doing it. Just pretend there's no variation. Have a no variation curve in your mind. So there's no variation, very little variation. Let's say that you can actually go out this weekend. Let's pretend, because I always use this as an example, so it's going to be even more of a thought experiment. And let's say that you're single. You're with your best male or female wingman or woman. Actually, the research shows for guys, wing women work better than wingmen, but that's a different part of a lecture. And you walk into a party and you look across the room and you look at this one person and you say, "Look at the pair on that one. That person's got such an amazing pair. That pair is just getting me all excited and hot and bothered. I have never seen such a sexier pair of opposable thumbs on a person in my entire life. I can see Brianna laughing at me. What did you think I was talking about? Shame on you guys. Opposable thumbs, right? We all have them. I have two. Most people have two opposable thumbs. We don't think about that as a variable. You know, if I were to ask you your top 10 things for a mate, nobody would give me opposable thumbs before I gave you the story. Because it's a given. There's no variation for it. There's no change for it. I don't know if this is going to show up on my webcam or not, but I have a slight impairment. It's nothing that has been too difficult for me in life, but all of my fingers are pretty much double jointed. And about the only thing that it causes me negatively is that I can never snap my fingers. I've never been able to snap my fingers. And if that's the worst thing I've got going for me, I'm pretty lucky. But I can throw one of my thumbs easily out of joint and put it back in. So I've got a weird opposable thumb. So you can see I'm kind of popping it out and putting it back into joint. Give you a couple angles on it. This works out well on the webcam, better than in class because you can see it closer. Hasn't got me a mate. I can't do it. My fingers just go bleh, they go all slide all together. I can't do it. Never been able to. I can't even try to. I'm not even going to try to. I've never been able to do it. You're just going to have to trust me on that one. I might snap in other ways, but fingers I won't snap at. Just can't do that one. But has my little thumb trick done anything for anybody? No. It's never helped me get a mate. I've always thought that maybe if I hitchhiked across Europe, it might help me get a ride. Somebody watching my thumb go in and out as I tried to hitchhike. But, you know, not much good. And it's because we don't look for that. There's no variation there. When we're looking for partners, we're looking for things that vary, and then we're choosing where we want them on that continuum. And in just plain evolutionary terms, parts of distributions are always favored, whether it's coloration, whether it's a certain shape of a beak in Darwin's finches, something like that. One of my students told me about this a couple semesters ago and sent me this picture, which I had to put into the lecture just to show you an extreme. The Shaquille O'Neal at 7'1" with this woman, I guess, who likes basketball players. She's no longer with Shaq. They don't look like they're much of a couple walking like that. There's no eye contact or anything, but I guess they're pretty far apart anyway. No, I did not do the attendance thing. I'll do that at the end. No problem. Okay, so we need these three things for evolution to happen. That's a basic. Now, Darwin lays out two forms of selection. We've talked about this at the very beginning of class. First of all, he lays out natural selection. Then he lays out sexual selection. Now, sexual selection has to do with a preference that one sex exerts on the other sex. And this is a straight biology online definition of it. It's different from natural selection in that it gives an individual a reproductive advantage rather than an advantage in the environment. Two subforms of it: intrasexual selection, and this is competition for mates between members of the same sex for members of the opposite sex. We compete with Okay, Angel, I know you're here. I know you've been here, so you'll get your points. Don't worry about that one. I'm reacting to comments as I get them. Okay, intrasexual selection. Let me give you a example of this. And again, you can chime in on the group chat if you want to. A group of guys get together to hang out. Do they dress up for each other? You can just put yes or no if you think they do as a group. Brianna is at least playing with me, thank you. Nana doesn't think so. Yeah. Guys generally don't do that. A group of women get together, do they dress up for each other? Let's say that they have, let's say an old-fashioned baby shower, wedding shower where guys aren't there. Yeah. Courtney says no. Most people are saying yes. It depends on some local variables too. So generally, women are competing for guys on physical attractiveness, based on their physical attractiveness. So a group of women get together, even if there aren't any guys there, they're hardwired to compete with each other by dressing up. So you go to a baby shower and it's all women and your grandmother is there. Well, grandma's all dressed up for the baby shower and she can't compete with you at 22, 23, but she's still hardwired to want to and is not consciously doing it. I imagine if you told grandma that I lectured about her getting dressed up for the baby shower as part of an evolutionary psych lecture, she'd probably wash my mouth out with soap, but she's going to do it anyway. Guys get together, excuse me, I hit something and almost dropped it. Guys get together, they don't necessarily compete on dress, but they compete on things like strength, resources, dominance. Remember, we did a lot on dominance early in the semester. And that's where you find guys competing. It's why when you see a movie like the Jackass movies, there aren't any women in them because women are too smart to be in Jackass movies. The guys are competing with each other by doing stupid guy tricks. And guys will do risky things to compete with each other, or they'll compete for who has the fanciest car in the computer world, who's got the fastest gaming computer with all the bells and whistles and stuff like that. So that's intrasexual competition, or selection it's called. Intersexual selection is the choice one sex exerts on the other sex. Now, since guys aren't that fussy in terms of their mating choices, Darwin operationalizes this as female choice. The stereotypical animal for intersexual selection is the peacock and the peahen, basically called peafowl. So here's a male peacock strutting his stuff. He's got all of his feathers out. And the feathers on a male peacock are quite a handicap. They add about 3 pounds to his body. The coloration is extremely bright. Makes it real easy to be snagged by a predator. In fact, when they're out of mating season, they look pretty much like the peahens. They're a pretty kind of drab brown bird. Just north of San Diego on the estate of an old Mexican cowboy. Where do peacocks live naturally? Geez, no one ever asked that question and I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm going to have to look it up. They live in the zoo. They live on this peacock farm north of San Diego that I've been to, but where their natural environment is, I'm not sure. Really good question. Nobody's asked me that since I've been doing this lecture, but it's a good question. Now I got some homework. but at this peacock ranch north of, might be in Hawaii, I don't know, but they might have been let loose there too. North of San Diego on the estate of kind of like a silent, early talky Mexican cowboy actor. There's a peacock ranch. So after a trip to San Diego, my wife and I were driving home, and you can know what a long drive it is from San Diego to Fresno. We were looking for places to stop, and my wife really at the time was liking to decorate with peacock feather things. And I've always been fond of the peacock from intersexual selection, so we stopped. It was out of mating season. I had my camera. I was going to take all these pictures for class. I was so excited. It was out of mating season. There was a bunch of brown birds lying in the dirt. It was not fun. Didn't get one usable picture. Although I just saw something on television just 2 days ago that I have to hunt down. I saw an Orbit gum commercial. I don't know if you've seen it yet, where a guy's trying to attract a woman, and he has a display of peacock feathers that come out in the commercial. So I have to steal that commercial and find it and download it and put it into my class stuff before it goes away. Here's a Getty education image of a peacock and a peahen. You can see the big differences in coloration. Biologists went out one time, and I don't know how many times they've done this study, but I know of one where they actually trimmed the tail feathers of the most studly male peacock on the mating grounds, and then put them back out there, and none of the females paid attention to them. I thought that was kind of a dirty study to do. The guy probably, the male was probably really upset. The day before that, he was getting all the female attention. The next day, none. Okay. You know, my favorite intersexual selection thing is the Irish elk, but we talked about that earlier in the semester. Now, Miller and Kenzwana wrote a book many years ago about evolutionary psych called Why Beautiful People Have More Daughters. And that answer to that question I've forgotten. I have to look up. But it's a good entry to think about evolutionary psych. So let's look at these things. First of all, we have to remember, and a lot of people forget this, we're animals. A lot of people kind of take the Mr. Rogers approach and think, we're more special than the rest of the animals. Sure we are. No, we're not any more special than the rest of the animals. We just have bigger brains, and we've kind of supplanted their place in many cases. So people are animals. We oftentimes forget that. Whoops, too fast on the PowerPoint, I'm sorry. Second point, this is where students, psychology students, freak out when I show the slide. There's nothing special about the human brain. One of the things that you get drilled into your head as a psychology major is the amazing human brain. Well, human brains are amazing, but any brain to me is pretty amazing. And what Miller and Kenzwana say is that basically the human brain is pretty much the same as any other mammal brain, except more complex. We don't have extra brain lobes. We don't have extra pieces that other animals are missing from their brains. Ours are just far more sophisticated and elaborate. And that's all they mean there. If you were to look at a dog brain, if you were to look at a chimp brain, even a rat brain, they have all of the same structures as a human brain. They're just not as sophisticated. Okay, come on. No, I want it to go and it won't go. Human nature is innate. Now, coming off a person environment fit, this is going to be interesting. A lot of what we do is hardwired. Now, we don't like to admit this. We like to think that we freely choose everything we do. But we're very hardwired. In fact, that's a good thing, because if we had to think about every little thing we did consciously, we'd never get anything done. So if you think about the massive numbers of components in our bodies that are hardwired, until someone mentions it, I'm thinking I haven't even said it, I'm just getting ready to say it, but we don't think about breathing unless we're having troubles doing it. My sinuses are going nuts with the weather changing, and my wife's got allergies. My dog's even got a bad case of asthma right now with all the blooming stuff. Trying to get him to take an asthma pill is a pain. But a lot of what we do is very, very hardwired. We don't think about it much. It becomes automatic over time. Even things like walking. We think about walking, but we don't consciously necessarily think about every single step we take. If I'm going to move my arm around, I'm not thinking, got to pull this muscle in, pull that muscle out, got to fire this neuron, that neuron. It's all automatic. When I was a draftsman, robots were just coming into the assembly line. And I had to write instructions for a robot arm versus instructions for a man, typically that was working a welding machine. And usually this was a male job at the time because, well, sexism from the 70s, 70s and 80s when I was doing this. And these welding machines were heavy, nasty things. There was a big, big iron welder that the guy had to carry. To do a machine where a guy did the weld, all I had to do is put an X on my drawing, and the guy would know to weld there. To have a computer robot arm do it, I had to write every little step that the arm had to move to get into position, to do the weld, then to pull out and go back to the original position. There would be pages of instructions when all I had to do was tell the guy, weld here on the X. We're hardwired for lots and lots and lots of stuff. Miller and Kinswana kind of say this is only a partially true point, because they also say that behavior is a function both of our innate hardwiring and the environment that we're in. And that's pretty clear, pretty easy. If you think about the environment that we're in, well, everybody's in a different environment right now. And some of you might be having a little bit of trouble because you might not live by yourself, or, excuse me, running out of voice here. I haven't lectured in a long time, more than 5 or 10 minutes. But we're all in our household environments. I'm lucky enough to have an office at home, so I go to my office and I work. But you might not have that. You might be sitting in your living room. I've seen people sitting in their bedrooms. There was one person in one of the other classes that was outside playing with their dogs listening to me the other day in one of the other classes. So our behavior is a function both of the environment we're in and our hardwiring. One of the issues that a lot of people have been having with this distance learning stuff is sitting at home may not be in a conducive environment for learning, because you're not have all the preparatory cues and all that other stuff, and you may have some distractions. I've seen people who have their cameras on. There are other people that are walking by, or animals jumping in laps and stuff like that. Don't have that generally in the classroom. Although I think maybe a few dogs and cats in the classroom might be good for morale once in a while. Now, another issue, we've gone through those 4 points for Miller and Kinswana. Another thing we have to remember is that we're still very hardwired to be living on the savanna plains of Africa. No matter how pale white we may be, we all come from African origins. even as pasty white as I am, my ancient ancestors are Africans. Most of the time that our species has been in existence, we've been on the savanna plains of Africa. And we have to remember that our brains are still hardwired to be on the savanna plains of Africa. Agriculture didn't start till about 10,000 years ago. Now, one of the things about evolution that's hard for a lot of people to grasp are timelines. I wasn't around 10,000 years ago, no matter how old you might think I am. And got a junk call coming in on my phone. I have enough trouble remembering what I did last week sometimes, nevertheless 10,000 years ago. But 10,000 years in evolutionary time in the existence of our species is pretty much nothing. So we still have our hardwiring for being hunters and gatherers on the plains of Africa, which is what most of our time as a species was our environment. In fact, 99.9% of our history as a species, we were hunters and gatherers in Africa. So we have trouble comprehending things that didn't exist in the ancestral environment because we're not wired to deal with them. In fact, we've outstripped with our technology our ability to think about things. So let me give you some examples of that. Here's this perfectly nice looking woman. In one picture, she's been massively photoshopped. I think she's a cute girl in either picture, but in the second picture, the one on the right, you can see they've removed freckles, they've changed her skin tone, they've given her makeup, took away the lines from under her eyes, added some highlights. We know that the people we see in ads most of the time now are photoshopped to an inch of their life. And you might not even recognize them if you saw them in reality. Here's another example. Not only did the Photoshopper change the woman and her physique a little bit, they even changed the color of her bikini. She has a very small tummy in one picture on the right that's been fixed via Photoshop. So, you know, our ancestors didn't deal with Photoshopped people. Did I show you these things before? These are some of my favorite things. I find a way to work them into class. Photoshopped non-real animals. So here is a combination of a fish and a flamingo. You could probably convince a little kid this exists. This is my favorite one. You have the kind of puffer fish combined with a zebra. I show you this one just on purpose. No, the jokes don't get any better when we're doing this online. There's a catfish and a dog seal. And they like doing elephant seals. Now, there are people that have lots of time to do this. I only have time to find them online. So I can steal them and put them into my PowerPoints. But they have elephant seals all over the place. This one, they've even mixed real elephant seals in with the phony ones they've created. Let me show you this little video on celebrities and plastic surgery. It's got real cheesy piano music playing behind it. So actually, I can get rid of the cheesy piano music by shutting off my speaker. I'm going to shut my speaker off just for a minute and let you watch this. So hopefully you can still hear me through the mic. I'm glad you like those, Stacy's. I get a kick out of them too. I use them for different things and class, and in the history of psych class, I use them. Actually, whoops, didn't play. Okay, go. Okay, now it's, oh, there we go. Now, I did not put the editorial comments in here, but it's interesting to look at the before and after plastic surgery pictures for some of these people. And you can see that plastic surgeons have found ways to change just about any part of the human anatomy. Like I said, those aren't my editorial comments. I don't necessarily disagree with them. They're just not mine. A chin implant, I would have never thought of such a thing. Look at the differences with Nicole Kidman. Kenny Rogers just passed, and you can see what plastic surgery did to him. There's a little English fun humor there. I always get a kick out of the Paris Hilton thing. Paris Hilton can afford good work. Whatever happened to Paris Hilton? She kind of fell off the edge there. Sarah Jessica Parker. There's an old movie, pretty good Steve Martin movie called LA Story. And Sarah Jessica Parker plays a role in LA Story. That's a minor role. If you were to go watch that movie, I think it's a 1980s era movie, you would barely recognize her from her current state. Here's a Photoshop of something that doesn't exist, dinosaurs and Chinese businessmen. Both existed, just not at the same time. Now here is something a little bit more serious. This is a news picture from a Israeli air raid over Beirut, Lebanon. And you can see all the smoke and the devastation. But the journalist who did the story actually photoshopped more smoke in before they turned the picture in. And the real picture, which is the top picture, is bad enough, shows enough devastation. But, you know, you have to wonder, and in the era where certain people are saying there's fake news, I always wonder whether my news is being photoshopped now. So, back to sex. We always come back to sex in this evolution lecture. And one of the things I don't have is when I'm teaching you in class and using PowerPoint, and I just looked up how to do PowerPoint in Zoom this morning, but I don't get my preview, so I don't know what my next slide is sometimes. And I practice this, but I get carried away and start talking and forget. So sex and the cost of reproduction. And I am now going to attempt to explain to you the conflict between the sexes. Will I resolve the conflict between the sexes? No. If I could do that, I'd be off getting my Nobel Prize right now, instead of sitting here talking to you, which I'm enjoying doing, but a Nobel Prize would be nice, especially the check. But let's at least talk about the conflict between the sexes from an evolutionary point of view. And like most things with sex, my bad joke about this is size matters. This is an electron microscopic view of a female ovum, multiple male sperm. You can see the female ovum is a massively large cell compared to the sperm. And this basic sex difference drives a lot of things. In fact, some people take it to an even big extreme. They say that women nest more because their sex cells don't move around as much as male sperm, which are more mobile. I think that's taking an idea too far, but people do that. Here is the consequences of the biological phenomena of ancygamy. Anciogamy is basically two sexes. Most animal species have two sexes. There are many asexual animals. And the most sexes I've ever read about, and it's kind of fitting, if I ever were to write an evolutionary book, I'd use this example in here. But there is a species of mud slime where there are about 16 identifiable different sexes. Kind of hard to phantom, but it's kind of also fitting that having more than two sexes gets slimy. Which sign means which? The one on the left is male with the arrow going up. The one with the circle and the cross on the right is female. Thanks for asking, because I'm sure someone else didn't know that. I like to be a I like to play biologist when I do this, because I think of, and if you've been a historian of psychology, you know that a lot of psychology came out of biology. And I'm one of those weird people that believe that psychology actually should be a subfield of biology. Gets me in trouble. Okay, let's look at men first. That's the left side. We guys have small sex cells. They're fragile, highly mobile, nutrient poor. They have a life of approximately 24 hours. Males produce them in massive quantities. And the best strategy that you have for using resources that are really, really cheap is to be indiscriminate with them and use them all over the place. Females, on the other hand, and this is not just a human thing, this is a cross-species thing, have large sex cells. They're sturdy. They don't move around a lot. They're relatively immobile. They're extremely nutrient rich. Now, a woman might have the capacity to produce about 1 million ovum, but she'll probably during her reproductive years use on average about 400. So you have an expensive commodity that is rare, and you have to invest a lot in it. What do? You be selective and choosy with it. So here's the basic difference between men and women. Men have the best strategy for guys are to be indiscriminate scumbags. Scumbag part is an editorial comment. Have sex with as many women as you possibly can. Produce as many offspring as you can. That's how you win the evolution game. There's no way that a woman can ever near the potential offspring reproduction of a male, because it's just too biologically expensive. So women are going to be extremely selective in how they invest their sex cells. Now, women don't necessarily think about this when they're dating a guy, and they're not thinking, do I want to invest my sex cells in this guy? It's, again, an unconscious kind of thing. But women tend to be extremely selective when they have sex and when they mate with a man, because it's expensive and the consequences are also expensive. If a woman does get pregnant, she has to carry the baby for 9 months. She has to invest a considerable amount of resources in nurturing the child, breastfeeding and stuff like that. And she has to go through giving birth, all of which are very hard on the body, very expensive. One of the people I like to follow is a guy named Robert Winston. He's a English OBGYN and does a lot of specials and science stuff. He's kind of like the Neil deGrasse Tyson of England in some ways. except for biology. And in one of his videos about evolution, he says, reproducing for a guy takes about as much energy as it does to boil water for a cup of tea. In other words, not much. So here's the big difference. And let me give you some context. Let's say that we were meeting and still face to face, and we're in the classroom, because I use this example in the classroom. We have an exam in class. You pull out a Scantron. Somebody doesn't have a Scantron and makes the pronouncement, can I borrow a Scantron from somebody? Half a dozen people will whip out an extra Scantron to give it to them. You've probably seen it all the time, right? No big deal. Scantrons are cheap. I don't think the Scantron company is going to start advertising itself as being cheap as sperm, but this is my example. So you have a Scantron. Scantrons are cheap. Let's say, on the other hand, somebody says, my laptop's broken and I need to study for the exam. Can I have yours for a week or two? You're going to say, hell no, right? Laptops are expensive. Scantrons are cheap. It's the same kind of cost benefit kind of thing. We are extremely careful with expensive commodities. We are extremely indiscriminate with cheap stuff, right? We do the same thing with our biology. So the consequence for reproduction for women is reproduction is far more costly for females. Women have the cost of reproduction physically, and have the physical cost, excuse me, I got lost a second. I'm trying to look at everything in 3 screens at the same time. Women have the physical cost of reproduction, not only the biological cost of the ovum, but women go through their ovulation cycles every month, which is part of reproduction long-term for women. There's a biological cost for that. Pregnancy is an extremely large physical cost on a woman. Women have limited reproductive resources. Women can start having babies once puberty is onset till menopause. From puberty till their death, men can reproduce. Now, new research has shown that old guy sperm is not as good as young guy sperm, but old guys can still have babies. I've been watching a lot of this COVID stuff. There was a concert by the Rolling Stones the other day. They did from their houses. What happened recently with Mick Jagger, a couple years ago, he had a baby. Jagger is in his mid-70s. He had a baby with a 26-year-old ballerina. You're not going to find a 70-some-year-old woman having babies. So guys are always going to be attempting to spread their seed and have reproductive success. Women are always going to be pushing back because it's physically expensive. And no, it isn't fair. Yeah, we're never going to make it fair. My next example was going to be the old notion is, I don't know how many times you've seen it in your life, but I've seen it many times. You have a couple come up and the woman has just found out she's pregnant and they're happy about it. They want to have the kid. And they'll talk about, we're pregnant. Well, about 8 months into the pregnancy, the guy still might saying, we're pregnant. And the woman's been having pregnancy sickness and she's been lugging this thing that's as heavy as a bowling ball in her stomach. And all of a sudden, it's not we're pregnant anymore as far as she's concerned. It's I'm pregnant and you don't have to deal with any of this. And, Brianna said, and Yvonne as well said, it's not fair. We'll never be able to make it fair. So women have limited reproductive resources. We've talked about that. But the one thing women have going for them is they've had the baby last so they know it's theirs, which is a major, major thing. Cute, Brianna, I saw the note. Now for guys, reproduction's cheap. Virtually unlimited reproductive resources. The cost of reproduction for men, very, very inexpensive biologically. But the one thing guys don't have going for them is they're not necessarily certain of paternity. Is it my baby? Is it the pool boy's baby? Is it the gardener's baby? You got this big baby maybe thing going here. Well, now we have DNA test to solve that problem for men. But you have to remember, that's something that's just around the last, I would say 10, 20 years. And that's a very short little blip in the history of our species. So guys always have to worry about the baby being theirs. And there's some interesting things that come out of this that we won't get to touch on, but as Brianna was saying, this is a whole class. You're getting a couple of hour short version of a whole class, the 157 class. Yeah, I think DNA testing is only possible after the baby is born. Not sure if you can do it before. But, sorry, my train of thought got distracted. Let me get on track. So babies tend to look more like dad than mom at birth. In fact, there's been research that's shown that. One of the things that I've experienced as I've wandered around Fashion Fair Mall when Fashion Fair Mall was open was that I watched couples because I eavesdrop because I'm a psychologist and it's my job to listen to things about human behavior. But twice in Fashion Fair, I've seen, you go to Fashion Fair on a Saturday, you get the young couples that are hunting and gathering baby stuff and things like that. And then you have all the little, the little teeny boppers doing their mating rituals, walking around in groups, checking each other out. It's great for psychology. But twice I've seen two couples encounter each other and say, one says to the other, "Oh, the baby looks just like dad." So you have that. That's a little thing guys have, but it's still not an absolute certainty. A lot of people say evolutionary theory, personality theories, evolutionary psychology is very sexist. And I agree, except they don't think it's the sexist way. I think it's sexist. I think that it's sexist. It explains sexism very well because males will suppress women to make sure the baby's theirs. And if you look at our history as a species, guys have done nasty things to women to make sure that the babies they have are theirs. Now, Nama just sent me a long text that I've got to look up and read for a second. We'll talk about this kind of stuff. We'll get there. And some of you are having a side conversation about in utero DNA testing, which is interesting too. But I promise we're going to get to the why women like creative guys kind of stuff after we get through this basic stuff. I promise you. That's fun stuff. Okay, so the conflict between the sexes is all about the size of sex cells. Okay, now if I can get the slide to move. I missed that. Okay. Okay, I found this slide, or this picture from this is from an old Woody Allen movie, Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex But Was Afraid to Ask. And Woody Allen in this movie, one of the vignettes plays a sperm. And they're all waiting to go there. So it was kind of a funny picture. And evolutionary theorists like to say sperm is cheap. as relative to female ovum. It's actually grammatically incorrect because sperm is a plural. It should be spermarchy, but that just doesn't sound as cool. And then I found this, and I think this still fits very well. You know, fits more and more all the time. And I'm not talking about any particular politician. This kind of, I found this drawing analogy today, and I think it really makes this point. So let's assume a woman can have 10 kids, which is a lot of kids to have. But if you go back to early 20th century America, it wasn't an unusual thing for women to have lots and lots of kids. There was a lot of infant mortality and stuff like that. So if a woman can have 10 husbands and 1 kid each, she can have 10 kids. But if a guy has 10 wives and has 10 kids with each one, he could have 100 kids. You can see how the ratios work that way. I think the top mom of all time is, and I need to write this down next time because I look it up and then I try to remember it, but it's around 35 children, which is a whole lot of kids. And she had several multiple births. She had at least 2 sets of triplets, multiple sets of twins. And I don't know anything more about her than that. I don't know if she was on fertility drugs or anything like that. But 36, that's a lot of kids. I would hazard a guess that the women in class would not necessarily want to have 10 kids. So 36 right out. The top father of all times is a Mideastern sultan from the medieval era times. Had 800, I think it's 866 children. Try to remember those birthdays. In the ancient Chinese courts, there were actuarials or accountant type people who kept track of each princess in the prince's harem's menstrual cycle and told him who he was going to sleep with on which night to produce the most little princes and princesses. How's that for romance? The bookkeeper tells you who you're going to have sex with. Now, this gets at Nana's question. You've probably heard the old saying that your brain is your biggest sex organ. A few years ago, 2007, a little bit before that, some folks came up with the idea of mating intelligence. And mating intelligence is something that I've become fascinated with, and I've been studying it in my lab. Mating intelligence is basically the mind's reproductive system. Like I said, you probably heard the old saying, your brain is your biggest sex organ. This kind of gets at that too. If you can't see the little cartoon there because it's kind of abstract, it shows a couple of disgruntled cave guys walking away from a scene there, and there's all kinds of hot cave women around this other guy who's signing autographs. And the caption read, "Oh, he's the guy that discovered fire." Well, women like guys with big brains because big brains brings you lots of other stuff. So how does a woman find a guy with a big brain? And that's what mating intelligence is about. And we'll get to some of the things there. I was just talking in the history class. We just finished intelligence theory. And Lewis Terman, a Stanford psychologist in the 1930s, did a study of genius. And he found that the genius children he studied all the way into adulthood made about twice as much money as the average American did during that same time. So intelligence brings some side payoffs. And mating intelligence gets at the mind's reproductive system. Now, Miller, who came up with the idea about 20 years ago, said that many human traits evolved through sexual selection as to what he calls mental fitness indicators. And recently, a woman named Marty Hazelton, who is a later and far more successful than me, David Buss student, has called this phenomena peacocking, where guys show off stuff to women. And usually they're showing off their mental fitness. So this gets at your question earlier, Nama. So here are some of the things guys do to show their big brains off to women. So the first mental fitness indicator I want to tell you about is language. Being able to have an interesting conversation, being able to tell stories, stuff like that. This probably goes back in our species to the savanna plains of Africa, when our ancestors were sitting around the campfire, no cable TV, no cell phones, no Netflix, no Hulu, telling stories. And probably the best storytellers were most interesting to the women. My poster child for language as a mental fitness indicator is Cyrano de Bergerac from the story of the same name. And if you remember the story, Cyrano had this great gift of gab and he could make women sway. The only problem he had was the nose thing. Now, if you ask women about one of the worst things a guy could do on a first date, it's being boring. I don't know how many of the women in class agree with that. But guys need a good gift of gab to be able to attract women, amongst other things. So telling stories, having a good conversation, really important. And it takes intelligence to be able to do that. I love my oldest granddaughter to death, Caroline. And when she was about 3 or 4, the first Frozen movie came out. And just to show you about intelligence kind of stuff. Now she's super smart. She's smart as a whip. But have you ever heard a little kid who hasn't kind of built their skills yet try to tell you the story of something like a movie? I can still see her in my mind's eye trying to tell me the story of Frozen. And she'd get halfway through and then she'd say, but this happened at the beginning. I forgot to tell you that. If an adult does that, that's pretty tragic. If a 4-year-old does that, it's funny. So language, art. Why do women like the starving artist type guy? It's because artistic ability shows off big brain stuff. Being able to produce artwork of any kind shows intelligence. And this explains why women oftentimes like the starving artist. Might not have a lot of money, but he's got the big brain that allows him to produce art. Excuse me. That's sinuses. Nothing more to worry about than that. Morality, which kind of doesn't necessarily fit in with the rest of it. It fits in theoretically, but it's kind of a shoehorn fit to me. Displaying moral virtues like kindness, honesty, heroism, humility, gift giving, stuff like that. Women really like that. One thing that I often do, and my wife knows I do it, is I look at the personal ads, because I get lots of good stuff from the personal ads for my lectures. And I use the personal ads between marriage looking for a mate, because I had my kids 80% of the time. I work lots and lots of hours. So when online dating was new, I was using it. And I found pretty much most of the women were as advertised and had a lot of first dates, which is kind of, I think, the thing that most people know about online dating now. But I remember this one woman who I went out with a few times, and we just didn't have the spark, but she became a platonic friend. She was extremely weary. Now, this was early on in the online dating days. And she was coming off a 3-month relationship with a guy she found out was married. He didn't disclose that. He said he was single on his online profile. Well, now that the internet has saturated so many things, I'm sure, and I've heard about this, I haven't had to do it because I've been married for 19 years, but people that do online dating now oftentimes Google the people that they're going to online date to see if they're really telling the truth. So I guess it's a lot easier now to find out if someone's married online dating. So honesty, it's not, it's not honesty to say to cheat on somebody. Women like heroes. Another thing you see in a lot of the personal ads are women want guys in a uniform. Not necessarily the uniform of a McDonald's employee or something like that. They're usually talking about some kind of like first responder, military kind of guy, because doing a job like that implies some bravery or heroism. Humility, gift giving, kindness, all good characteristics women are looking for. They kind of fall under this one. It's kind of a basket of stuff. Who became aware of a study a couple of years ago that I found really interesting. Someone did a study of the reproductive success of men who won the Medal of Honor during the Second World War. Now, the Medal of Honor is our highest military award. Very, very rare that it's given. And it turns out that these researchers went back and looked at how many kids on average did guys who won the Congressional Medal of Honor have compared to the average World War II vet. Found they had significantly more kids than the average World War II vet. So women are attracted to heroes. Humor. This is another one that shows up all the time in personal ads. Women say they want a guy with a good sense of humor. Being able to be amusing, to tell jokes, to string witticisms together, to use satire, irony, and all that kind of good comedic stuff. It takes intelligence. When I started looking at the stuff, I got all excited. We had a lab meeting. At the time, my research group was pretty big. I think I had about 8 people in my lab. And we had a lab meeting, and I told my students, we're going to study humor from an evolutionary perspective. And I want you to do this study and you to do this other study. So I sent everybody to the library, and we looked up all the literature, and we found all the studies that we had planned to do already had been done, which was kind of a bummer. But on the other hand, we got to read these cool studies and find out some neat stuff. And the one thing that stays in my mind about humor is the average male professional comedian has about 1 standard deviation higher intelligence score than the average American male. So even if they're a road dog working for tips, not making a lot of money, the average male comedian is smarter than the average guy. So humor becomes another good variable here. Music. This is the one Emma was talking about, the guy with the guitar case. It takes intelligence to be able to play music, dance. I would even say do things like rap and all that kind of stuff. It takes some intelligence to be able to string things together like that. And that's why women are attracted to music type people, because music, the ability to produce music, shows intelligence. My one big example of that is I'm not a fan of rap music, hip hop music. I'm just too old. It's not my music, it's your music. You're supposed to have a music that old people hate. and I just don't get it. I understand a lot of the political stuff, and I can appreciate a lot of the political, social stuff that rap artists do. But it's just not my music. But if you look at a lot of these rap and hip hop artists, they are extremely bright guys, and they've used their ability to promote rap and hip hop music. And then they've used their intelligence with the money they've made from their music to go into other businesses. My big example of that is whatever his name is right now, Sean Diddy Combs. He's got the Sean John line of clothing. And actually, I've got a few pieces of that. I've got a couple of really cool Sean John ties. But he's built quite the business, clothing business. And many, rap artists have taken their money and then used it to make lots more money because they're just bright guys. They're smart guys, and they've been able to get out of poverty and do a lot of really cool stuff doing that. It's also why every teenage boy wants to start a garage band, because it attracts teenage girls. Excuse me. I know you're not supposed to rub your nose, but I've been holding it for about 40 minutes. I have to tell a story on my oldest son who just turned 28 last month. David was looking at the time too. Okay. David is my oldest son. He's 28 now. When he was in high school, he comes to me one day and he goes, "Dad, I want to talk to you about something." Well, that immediately puts any parent on guard immediately, like, uh-oh, what's coming next? And he goes, "My friends and I want to start a band." And I said, "David, that's a really good idea. So what's going to go on in this band?" And my son David has some friends who are really talented musicians. None of them have hit it big, but they're trying hard still. They're all in their late 20s, but there are a few of them that are still trying to pull the music thing off. Excuse me. And I said, "David," I said, "that's well and good." And I said, there's only one problem I see with you joining this band." And I said, "Well, what are you going to do in this band?" Because, well, David's got about my vocal ability. And my son's, where'd he go? My son's dog, Harvey, was lying at my feet a few minutes ago. He's left the room. He got bored with me. But when I sing around the house, and I'll never sing in public because my singing hurts dog ears and they come and bite my heels. So I figure if it hurts dog ears, it can't be too good for people. So I said, "You got my vocal abilities. You're not really good at singing, and you don't play an instrument." So I almost did one of these Seinfeld things. "Just what are you going to do in this band?" I thought, well, maybe you're going to be the roadie, or maybe he's going to run the board or something. And he goes, "Well, my friends told me playing the bass was really easy to do, and I'm going to stand. They're going to teach me a couple of chords, and all I have to do is stand in the back and hit the bass with a couple of chords." And then, like any good father, well, maybe not good father, but like any father, the next thing is, what's it going to cost me? So am I going to have to go out and buy him a bass? Am I going to have to go out and buy an amp and all this other kind of stuff? And David's a pretty smart guy. He was all prepared for that. And he goes, "My friend has a bass and another friend has an amp, and they're going to loan it to me. So it's not going to cost you any money." So I thought, then it's a really good idea, David. Why don't you go join this band then? Well, they lasted about 3 or 4 weeks and broke up. They didn't even get a one-hit wonder. David was lost interest, because learning to play an instrument is hard work. And at the time, he was interested in other things than hard work. But, musical ability is a biggie, and it shows intelligence. Now, we've gone an hour and 40 minutes. without a break. So I think that's enough for today. Don't run away yet. I forgot to set up a poll. Let me come up with a new poll question quickly. Still learning this. Whoops. Okay, where do you make a new poll? I have not yet posted the slides. I will post the slides. I will also post this. Tuesday we'll continue with this lecture. It's a pretty long one. Let me see. But yes, I will post it. Oh, something's hiding behind you. Ah, that's the screen I need. It was hiding behind all of you guys on the Zoom thing. Okay. Let me type a quick question. Points for 23, 2020. Well, that's P154. So you don't have to watch me type. I'm just going to put Y and N. You're smart enough to figure that out. Okay. Okay. Now where did it go? Okay. Sorry about this. And I was trying to be slick with my technology. And okay. There's the save. It was hiding under there. Okay. The odds are I will be teaching, I've been teaching the 157 class every semester for a long time now. So the odds are I don't have my teaching schedule for 2021 or 2021 yet. That's hard to think about even, Albert, but the odds are I will be teaching it in that semester. So it's the one I teach in the late afternoon. I've been doing it from 5 to 7 at night. And I'm thinking about switching it back to a 1 night a week class, but I'll probably do it with 1 hour arranged because 5 to 9 blows people out. You know me, I can talk for 5 hours, but people tend to start fading after 8 o'clock. So here's your poll. Go ahead and click in. Questions, comments? Thank everyone for hanging in. This wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Thank you for comments and the chat and stuff. I really appreciate that. So you guys have a great weekend. And if you don't have any questions, I'll let you go and we'll see you on the flip side.
All right. See you next time.
Thank you for the kind comments. Are you still doing? Yes. If I owe you a makeup, keep on bugging me and I will eventually get it done for you. I'm going to try to get a couple done today between classes, or I have to do my 5 o'clock thing. I'm waiting for Albert's question. He said he had a question, but the rest of you can take off. You're welcome. Yeah, now that we've done the mating intelligence stuff, it is enough information to do the paper. Although if you hang on through next Tuesday's lecture, when we finish, you'll have a little bit more, but I'll post the whole PowerPoint. So if you want to look ahead, you can do that. Okay, that reminds me, I have to figure out how to stop the recording and all that stuff so that I can have it saved and loaded for you.